is Barbara French. I'm Associate Vice Chancellor of University Relations, and welcome to the Chancellor's Town Hall on the budget and operational excellence. So, Chancellor?
Thank you, everyone, for coming. There's plenty of seats in the front row. So I could pause and let those of you who would like to walk down the stairs. And you're invited. There won't be any quiz or anything scary in the front row, I can assure you. Let me start by welcoming all of those colleagues who are joining us remotely. Please send an email quickly if you can't hear me or see me. So we've got folks from all over the campus joining us for this afternoon. And again, I want to just thank all of you for making time in your busy day. I know 1 o'clock is not perfect for everyone, and we're trying to juggle the timing of these. So please tell your colleagues who needed to miss this that I'm sorry that noon to 1 works better, and we couldn't pull that off this time, and we'll think about that for the next town hall. But I'm trying to make sure that as many folks as possible can attend, and we'll also put the recording on the web for those of you who couldn't join us in person. As Barbara French just said, this session is meant to be an update on the budget and the operational excellence project, and a report to the campus on both of those. Here's the agenda that I'm going to follow. A little bit of a reminder on priorities, the report on our budget status, recommendations, the feedback I've received so far from the campus, and next steps. So I want to start by just making sure all of you know that today's report and my first 9 months in the role as Chancellor have not distracted me or changed the priorities for the campus. I think these are the right 5 priorities: patients and health, discovery, education, people, and business. I've asked myself, and perhaps some of you have wondered as well, why is the next town hall that I give after outlining my priorities and talking to you about the campus, why are we talking about operational excellence? Why not something having to do, for example, with patients and health as this town hall's topic? And the reason, and I hope it will become clear if it isn't already clear to you, is that I think that this project, the operational excellence, and some of the things that I'm going to talk about today are enabling of us to maximally allow ourselves to meet these priorities and to execute against these priorities and to deal with the fiscal challenges that we all have now, but also to remain focused on these priorities. So it isn't my intention today to only talk to you about the business of how we run UCSF or people-related topics, but I think all 5 of these are inevitably intertwined. And so the Operational Excellence Project does enable us to get to our priorities and is very consistent with the priorities that I outlined last November. So let's go back in time to where this project came from. A work group was formed in February of 2010, and I charged this work group with this task: to identify options for addressing the ongoing cuts in state funds and rising employee costs. And one of the central tenets for me was no year 2 of furloughs. Let's limit the furloughs to 1 year because of all the challenges about the furloughs. But also, can we get ahead of this state budget process that every few weeks last year, I think it must have felt, I wasn't here, but it must have felt that going back over and over again with new cuts. That led to a lot of scrambling and big challenges across our campus. So the concept of operational excellence was, could we get ahead of those state cuts? Could we have a plan for ourselves that could allow our campus to operate in a way that wasn't scurrying every few weeks as bad news came out of Sacramento and Oakland, and get ahead of it? So the specific request was to improve our fiscal year 2011 operating margin by between 28 and 40 million through a combination of administrative efficiencies, new or increased revenue, and net cost reductions. And conceptually, I wanted to be able to say to myself and to all of you and all of our supporters that we're spending our money wisely. That every penny that we spend at UCSF is in service of our mission and spent in a way that is as thoughtful as possible, consistent with our mission, and executing what we have. But I also think it's a healthy thing for an organization like ours to have a culture and an environment that continually asks, is there a better way? Could we do this more efficiently, more effectively? Is our excellence as excellent as we want it to be, or we say it is? And I like operating in that environment. I like being around people who ask questions like, why do we do it that way? And personally, if I ask the question, why do we do it that way? If the answer is because we always have, it's not my favorite answer. Or we can't do it another way, is not also a really positive answer. And so I want to just encourage all of you, and many of you already are this way, as leaders on our campus and as folks who influence me. I love when people say to me, why are you doing what you're doing? And I hope you'll hear in my slides that I think that's good for UCSF and good for me to feel accountable to letting you know that. But I think all of us strive for excellence, and that kind of atmosphere where we continually ask, why are we doing it that way, and is there a better way, and what are the impediments between us and potentially a better way of operating? So this is where we started. This was the charge to the work group back in February of 2010. So let's anchor ourselves in the current budget status. So in February of 2010, we didn't suspect that there would be good news about the budget, but we had a lot of uncertainty, as we do every year if it's only February. So this is a way to simplify where we think we are today. Our projected state and general fund shortfall, we continue to project at 28 million. And I want to be very clear that that projection is based on an assumption that what Governor Schwarzenegger has requested and what was in his May update actually doesn't come through. And you might say, well, gee, that's so pessimistic. I thought you told us you're an optimist, Sue. I'm a realist. And I think for us to think that during all the machinations, and as they say, the heat of August in Sacramento, to assume something that is vastly better than last year or the year before, I think would be unwise. So this is a budget assumption. In other words, we don't know, but with a lot of dialogue from people who are as close to this as possible, our budget assumption is that we'll have this $28 million shortfall. We also are assuming that we will have an allocation that comes to UCSF of ed fees. And again, this is our assumption based on dialogue, that we will have an allocation that comes to us that will allow us to put $10 million of ed fee money against this shortfall. Again, an assumption based on everything we know now, and that would mean a net state and general fund shortfall of $18 million. So the 18 million isn't precise because there's a lot of uncertainty around these numbers, but it's a number we can work with and a number we can make some assumptions around to allow us to budget for the fiscal year 10-11. So my group, the executive committee, the folks who report to me in the chancellor's office, sat down with that number and with a fundamental sense that we wanted to minimize the impact of these cuts, the direct impact of these cuts on the schools. We looked at, so how do we focus on solving that $18 million gap? And here's what we came up with. Central administration, those units that report into me, would shoulder the largest share of reductions. Now, if we just did the math, central administration would have proportionately about 30% of the burden, but we said, no, we want to spend the smallest amount possible on administration and the greatest amount possible on patients and health, discovery, and education, consistent with our priorities. Let's attempt to get 50% of these savings from central administration. The medical center agreed to provide about 1/3 of the solution by passing through all of the state funds that come to the medical center towards solving this issue. In fact, more than $6 million. And that leaves the schools to shoulder the remaining burden. So again, these are estimates, and we're still working out all the details of how we get to these savings. But I want you to hear the philosophy of how we thought about this, because again, it's consistent with our priorities, and it's consistent with making sure that all the money that we do receive from the state and how we think about our budget maximizes our ability to spend money on the mission. So with that goal in mind and these general principles, we're starting to look at the recommendations from the Operational Excellence Project. Now, this slide outlines some of the findings. As you can imagine, there was a very thick binder of findings, and I've tried to summarize for you some of those findings and some of the big messages that I heard and that we all heard from the Operational Excellence Work Group when they reported back after their findings that started in February. So let me start with something that shouldn't go unsaid. UCSF has amazing staff and faculty. We're not in the top 10 on virtually any list you look at, if not the top 1, by accident. There is an enormous amount of excellence at UCSF, and there are fantastic people who work really hard every day. So none of the operational excellence findings were inconsistent with that, far the opposite. Faculty and staff work extremely hard and have suffered from years of cutbacks and unfunded mandates, and frankly a lack of investment in some of the systems and the business processes that would allow us to work differently. So when some people have heard me talk about operational excellence, they felt personally bad, like it's a judgment of them or a criticism of them. And my plea to you is don't feel that way. I'm talking about this in the spirit of what do we need to do as a campus to be excellent? And so I think that we need to recognize that people have worked in this way because of years of inadequate infrastructure and complex processes, what some might call this Lego-like structure, and I hope you can see this because it does look like quite the Lego-like structure. Shadow systems, heavy paper use, layered processes, and I know that this Lego system has been built to get the job done. So that really talented, dedicated people have been working when things don't work. They've made a system around things that don't work to get the job done. And I respect that. I'd probably do the same thing. I hope I would, because I hope I'd be as dedicated and driven. But the bottom line is all that great, passionate energy, talent, and hard work has created a system that increasingly challenges us to work effectively. That's a system that is really hard to be efficient with or excellent with when you get to 22,000 folks working at an academic medical center at a university. So that's where we are, is this complex, challenging Lego-like system. And that's really the heart and soul of the findings, is this is what we've built up over the years. So this is just a way to show that graphically, and it's a messy graph on purpose. We have this complex system where each department administrative structure varies broadly. And I've heard lots of feedback about this. Sometimes it works for people, sometimes it doesn't work. There's a lot of fragmentation. And one of the things that I find most challenging about the way we're working now is, because I care so much about great management and people's opportunity to develop and grow in their roles, this fragmented system does not always offer an opportunity for professional development, for a way to move up and be recognized for increasing expertise and talent within a job family. So the system that we have, while it does get the job done in some areas and not in some other areas, isn't maximally oriented to professional development or great management. And that's a challenge for me. I do believe that everyone deserves a good manager and a chance to know what they're signed up for and a chance to prosper and grow as they professionally develop. And this system, while it gets the job done, doesn't always allow for that. So you might say, well, that's a little bit fuzzy. I'm not sure I get it. I'm not sure what you mean by this system being inefficient. So prove that to me, or show me the kind of data that led to those conclusions. So this is just one slide and one example of the kinds of analyses that were done by the Operational Excellence Work Group. And I thought it might be helpful in sharing with you the kind of data that led to some of those observations, some of those findings, and some of the recommendations. So the example here is human resources. So I think we would all agree that human resources is a very important function to running an organization like UCSF, an institution like we have. Human resources supports nearly 22,000 people, and that includes paid and unpaid staff, because just because you're unpaid doesn't mean you don't have HR support. It does include the UC Office of the President that uses UCSF for HR support, but excludes the medical center. So just so we're all working with the same numbers, think about 22,000 people. The departmental HR headcount is 515 people. There's about 190 who are dedicated to delivering HR services. So dedicated means more than 50% of their time spent on human resources. But the remaining more than 320 people have significant overlap. So somebody who does HR in part of their time, but that's less than 50%, and they have other administrative functions like pre and post award or finance or other functions. We also have more than 90 additional people in multiple central HR functions. So what are the data? What are the benchmarks? And it's always dangerous to talk about benchmarks because we could all have a healthy debate about what are the best benchmarks. Some people have said to me, well, Sue, don't use private industry benchmarks. You just came from the business world, so it isn't like that at a university. Okay, that's good. So the College and University Professional Association for Human Resources are the data that we looked at for benchmarking. So colleges and universities, not business, not private industry. So I don't know that these are perfect, but they give us an estimate of a ratio that suggests that 127 to 1 employees to HR staff is the kind of benchmark that an organization like UCSF could use when we're asking ourselves, how does our ratio compare? And our ratio is 81 to 1. So again, the using numbers like 127 suggests a level of precision that is greater than these data deserve. So take that as a caveat. But let's think about if we have that kind of overstaffing because of the way we operate, that is a challenge for us. That is hard for us to think about. How do we spend money in service of our mission? How do we use too small a level of resources to execute what we have if the benchmarking would suggest that the way we're operating takes that many more people than the benchmark. So 127 to 1 versus 81 to 1. Again, not definitive. This isn't something that we can have a high level of confidence, but there is a suggestion that the way we're operating means that we have more HR staff than an organization of our size. So let me turn now from that general sense of the way that we operate to the recommendations. Over 3 years, beginning in fiscal year 2011, the Operational Excellence Task Force recommended that we focus on the work of administrators, their jobs, and very importantly, the technology that supports UCSF, and to regionalize or bring together some of these core services, specifically HR, IT, finance, and research administration. And that, in fact, while this project started and remains a good way for our campus to manage lowered resources, in fact, we should be able to have excellence, an accountable organization, and cost reduction. That this is an opportunity for us to organize ourselves in a way that would allow for that. And the vision here would be that we would go from the world that we've been operating in into something that I think is exciting and could bring excellence to our campus. So this is meant to be a picture that would show that conceptually what we're talking about here with operational excellence. And let me say something I think is really part and parcel of what this would mean for our campus. Because many people have told me, look, in my department it works really well. But you know, those guys over there, what I see in that other department, or that department, it's not very efficient. I even hear simple things like, well, it works really well for our department, but boy, if somebody was out on sick leave or left the job, and suddenly we have a hole. So even in the departments where it works well, it involves an amazing amount of single human being dedicated to a single task. And so the concept here is that all departments would have equal access to expert services, tools, and systems. And think of a world where someone new could come to UCSF and utilize those services without what else I'm told is, well, if you really know the place, you can get things done. And you know, I think that's great. Again, it's a symptom of talented people passionate about the mission, but it also makes me worry that as we have new folks coming into UCSF, what should we expect in terms of that startup time? You know, that's not really a good business practice if you have to be here for a decade before you figure the place out. So staff could develop expertise in a career path. Again, that's what good management looks like. When somebody is an expert, they have a possibility for career development and advancement. And we recognize that expertise, and we celebrate that expertise. They also could work closely with a department and be part of a community of colleagues who are subject matter experts as they are. And when hard things arise, there are colleagues to ask, how do you get this done? What is the latest in employment law for this issue or this challenge? What are the best practices? And one can advance through a system, and including management, without necessarily causing an enormous amount of disruption, because you would have these regional centers with subject matter experts. So along with that would be training, certification systems, job families, and career paths. So the vision here, and what good looks like, is something that for the campus is an accountable organization that has a can-do attitude, and for the people involved, they have the systems, the processes, and the training that they need to do their job well. And as I talk about that, having talked to a lot of people on campus, I know some people think, okay, Sue, you know, you're dreaming. But we're supposed to dream, right? We're supposed to try and do something that actually would advance, I would argue, our campus to a really great level of support and service, and very, very good for people at the same time. So I want to note that I told you where we started and where we are now. So let me be really clear that two things are different as compared to February. First thing is, I was asking this work group to come up with $28 to $40 million of savings. And as I've just told you, even with, I think, very practical, realistic thinking, and you know, things could get worse because we are in California and it's a tough time, but I think a very reasonable new goal would be to save $18 million to get us to where we need to be in the next fiscal year. So that's a little bit of good news. 18 is not as difficult as 28 to 40. The second thing is the Operational Excellence Work Group recommended, and I think this makes a lot of sense, because of the issues that we have with gaps in our systems and our business processes. 1 year would be chaotic. 3 years would be much more clever of us, would allow us to get those systems and processes in place and pace this out in a thoughtful way that minimally has the chance of disrupting the operations on our campus. So 18 million instead of 28 to 40, and a 3-year timeline instead of a 1-year timeline. Again, I think both of those, both a little bit better news than 28 to 40, and something that can be very thoughtful and paced out for our campus. So, because I just told you the good news, the opposite of that is next year is a little better than we thought, but it would be absolutely sugarcoating it not to be realistic about long-term issues. So long-term, how we pay for what we do at UCSF is a big challenge. and something that we all need to collaborate on to make sure that we have everything in place to address these looming issues. State budget. Here's a recent headline. Hopes for budget compromise dim amid California deficit. January, February, and March, we had a tiny bit of momentum, maybe, and then April came. And the April tax collections in California looked really bad. Hope springs eternal, maybe May. But our state is undergoing an unprecedented fiscal crisis. And so I think it would be unwise for us, although very, very good advocacy has taken place, and Schwarzenegger, and I'm sure his successor, put higher education high on their list of priorities. There's just not enough money to pay for everything that's on the priority list. The NIH budget, another headline. Lawmakers review commitment to science spending despite budget deficit fears. I do believe that the current administration in Washington is strongly committed to science and discovery, but the rational thing to expect is NIH budget to be relatively flat, particularly when adjusted for inflation. And that's, I think, what all of us expect. And finally, healthcare reform. What does healthcare reform mean to UCSF? Well, we're just starting to figure that out. And again, jobs affected by healthcare reform is one of the recent headlines. Healthcare reform is unlikely to mean a vast amount of new revenue coming to UCSF. I think that's fair to say. And we're all in the process of understanding what healthcare reform means for our medical center, for our training programs, for how we operate. I do think there's opportunities for leadership for UCSF within healthcare reform. But as it relates to finances, again, there's not some big amount of resources that will come to UCSF in the long term. Finally, on the long-term issues, many of you have participated in pension discussions, so I know you know that we face a daunting increase in employee costs. Shown in the gray on this slide are estimates for employee retiree healthcare costs and the campus retirement contributions for fiscal year 11 as compared to fiscal year 2013. And both of these are going up. And again, these are all funds, but 17 to 52 million for retiree and employee healthcare costs, and retirement going from more than 60 to more than 120 million. So you look at the revenue picture and these employee-related expenses, we have a lot of expenses coming forward in the future that we have to take into account as we think about our budget. So let's go back to the process of operational excellence, because I want you all to hear what in fact happened. Some of you probably know better than others. So the work group included more than 380 individuals campus-wide and from all the schools, and you've all received some email updates from myself and from John Klotz. I just held a series of focus group meetings with department chairs and faculty from all 4 schools. Information's been posted on the budget website, and I want to thank people who sent in ideas, suggestions, concerns, comments. And there's been campus-wide information and updates, and then here we are today. So feedback. I've gotten a lot of feedback, both at the small group meetings, and people have taken the opportunity to give me feedback either by email or in person. And I appreciate that very much. Here's some of the feedback that I've received. People want more detail. This is kind of fuzzy for me. What would it look like? What actually happens in my day that's different than what I do now? So more detail wanted. The point I've already made has been reinforced very strongly, and I get it. We can't expect to work differently without better infrastructure, especially in the information technology area. There's also a lack of confidence, given prior experiences that people have had on this campus. There's concerns about losing services that all of you need to get your job done, and especially specialized services. So I hear a lot, well, in my department, we need to do this activity or have this support. It's super specialized, and I've worked for the last decade to get that in place. Don't goof me up. I've been listening, I know. And look, I understand that. I really understand that you all rely on the very things I'm talking about today to execute our mission, and I take that very seriously. And last on this slide, but certainly not at all least, is concern about losing good employees. Concern that if we decrease the amount of staff that we have on our campus in these areas, that we'll lose the very people who collaborate with everyone and contribute directly to the excellence that is UCSF. And so these are, and I just captured a few of the kinds of feedback that I've heard, but these are some of the feedback areas that have been repetitively expressed to me, and I want you to know that myself and others involved in this project have been listening and heard this feedback, and these are areas that absolutely have to be addressed in this project. So what's going to happen next? I told you that today is one of the times in this project that's very important to let you know about the feedback and where we've been, and conceptually what we're going to do. And I want to outline in the next 3 slides next steps. But before I do, let me give you a date that I think is a very important date, and that is June 15th. So on June 15th, the control points need to put their budget into the budget office. And so the estimates of exactly where within the control points in different areas those cost savings for 2010-11 will come by June 15th. So in terms of key next steps, that date is very important. So what about central administration? Well, an HR service center will be established in finance and administrative services by September 30th, where all the FAS HR activities will be able to migrate. There'll be a finance service center set up by December 2010, up and running. In IT and other HR and finance service centers, we're still in the evaluation process, still working out the details for these, but those are both under study as well within central administration. So we have a number of efforts going on within central administration in HR, finance, IT, to make sure that we can move to a world that's consistent with this vision for more efficient central administrative services. How about the schools? The School of Medicine has formed 2 committees, a Dean Steering Committee made up of faculty and staff to evaluate options and submit recommendations for implementation as well as communication, and a Department Managers Work Group to evaluate options, assess the implications, and the design and the implementation delivery models. So a lot of work's already going on within the School of Medicine, and these committees are just getting formed right now. The schools of dentistry, nursing, and pharmacy have been and continue to work on local efficiencies within their schools. And they are also participating in the committees that I just talked about, and will be collaborating with the School of Medicine as well as with the central administration with committee representation to look at how can we, in a very practical way, collaborate on what we're doing in the operational excellence area with all of the schools. So here's what I'm signed up to do. I'm going to keep listening. As I mentioned, the smaller sessions and all of the feedback I've received has been incredibly helpful. And so I'll keep listening. Today doesn't mark the end of listening or learning more about what you all care about. We'll communicate frequently, especially if the budget or the plans change. I'll commit to you that if something's different than what I told you today, we'll let you know. I understand that this project is talking about change, and change is always hard, but we're talking about change that can affect people's jobs. And so I'm very sensitive to the personal impact of what we're talking about today on employees and their families. I'm also going to continue to advocate for our campus. And 2 things that I want you to know I've been very focused on is seeking additional resources for our campus, both through activities in the government affairs area, but also in the area of philanthropy, industry interactions. I'm out there. I would say by Friday, if I lose my voice, it means I've been doing a good job of advocating for UCSF, and I know all of you do the same. In addition, one of the feedback areas I haven't mentioned yet, but is really resonating for me is, boy, we can't decrease our staff because we're filling out paperwork left and right. We're doing things that we're signed up to do, either by our state legislature, at a federal level, by the Office of the President, or self-induced on our own campus. So I need to hear that. We all need to ask that question, why do we do it that way? Why are we filling out that paperwork? So I want to elicit the help of all of you on this one, because we all need to say, why are we filling out those papers? And if the answer is because we have to, is there a reason in 2010 we still have to? Is that absolutely necessary? And we all need to challenge that. So administrative requirements that don't advance our mission, that we do because it's historical, or we think we need to do, challenge all of that. So let's get back to long-term focus. As I've told some people, that as Chancellor, I'm so excited about UCSF. I'm so excited about our mission. You know, it's commencement time. There's nothing better than seeing the kind of students who come to UCSF and graduate from UCSF schools. It makes me so excited about where we're going in our future. As I mentioned, I think we should be leaders in today's world, and I am sure we will be. So coming back to our mission and priorities, continuing to invest in our future. In the end, the thing that I think is most important about this project is making sure that we can make investments in our future, that we have the resources to invest in new programs and new areas for our campus. And one that I want to mention is just on the strategic planning front. It's becoming time for us to update our campus strategic plan. And particularly, what does healthcare reform mean for our campus? Where are we going to go given the world outside UCSF? It's vastly different than when our current strategic plan was underway. We're also due to launch our next version of the long-range development plan, things that have to do particularly with the facilities on campus and investments that will be needed on that front. So there's a lot for us to focus on, and I think this project enables us to have the resources and the talent and the way of operating on campus to enable all of that. So I think that's my last slide, and I'm now happy to open up for question and answer. Thank you for listening.
I just want to thank you for taking the time to address us and open up a public forum to enable all of us to come together around solving these problems.
Thank you. For people on the phone, that was a thank you, which I really appreciate. You're welcome. I didn't want you to miss that if you're Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Thank all of you. I know people aren't shy because I've been getting cards and letters. There's a hand up in the back there. Can you please tell me your name before you ask the question?
Absolutely. My name is Daniel Dominguez Moncada. I won't ask anybody to spell it. It's kind of long.
Thank
My
you.
question for you, thank you, is there was about a 4-month period where the Operational Excellence Group came up with this plan that we're seeing. Is there any discussion now on the next wave of departments or units that will be looked at for cost savings? And if so, what group would that be?
So let me just start by saying that the vision here is intended to be campus-wide. And the discussions that I spoke about, and specifically the work that's going on in central administration and in the schools, is to start to look at what's the best way to execute this plan? What's the implementation look like? Because like all such plans, we need to get the job done at the same time as we're organizing this. So I don't have an answer for you in terms of the specific group, but over the next 6 weeks in particular, what is conceptual now is starting to become absolute concrete plans for implementation. Let me take your question as an opportunity to ask for a comment from John Plotz. So John was at the Office of the President when OP reorganized in Oakland, and he's also been in close contact with the other campuses to learn, what does this look like? What are the watch-outs, and how do you really execute such a plan? So let me ask John to make a few comments.
Thank you, Sue. As Sue mentioned, I was at the Office of the President in 2007 and 2008 when they retained a monitor group, a group of consultants to come in and look at construction operations in the Office of the President. As a result of that study, the monitor group suggested that service centers be created for HR, finance, IT, and then in addition to that, some of the programs were moved out to the campuses. But all told, there's about a $55 million savings as a result of that effort in the Office of the President. It was hard work. It was, as Sue mentioned, it was very difficult work and it affected people. On the other hand, it did have very beneficial results for the university. At Berkeley, they, as many of you know, they hired paid consultants to come in and do a similar study. And not surprisingly, they found some of the same opportunities, creating service centers for IT, HR, finance. In addition, they suggested Berkeley move very quickly in terms of e-procurement and leveraging their purchasing strategies. And also they had some comments on energy management. So we've got a consistent set of recommendations from 2 different consultants at 2 different locations. I think what we'll also see is a greater expectation by the Office of the President, and frankly, greater expectations from all of us to work more collaboratively with our sister campuses. I think the days of all of us creating 10 different systems, those days are over. We need to find, as an example, who has the greatest system and leverage that across the entire system. As I read, as I look around and talk to colleagues and I read different things, I think all universities in the U.S. are going through some form of restructuring. It's just the nature of what's going on right now. I'm particularly appreciative of the efforts from the operational excellence work group, because these recommendations were specific to UCSF. They involved our own people, and it wasn't done with a set of consultants. I think the roadmap is very, very good for UCSF.
Thanks, John. And we didn't spend $3 million. Yes, question up here.
Diana Block, Pediatrics. Well, I appreciate the complexity of the whole process, and so I'm not sure how much of an answer you can give me, but you didn't mention in any of the slides, like, what are the principles that will guide the transition? I mean, so if you have more employees, let's take in HR or in post-award, and some of them are more generalists, and some of them are more specific, and then some of them have 15 years seniority, and some of them have 3 years seniority. How is this all going to come together? What are the ways in which you're going to make determinations as to, in the specific employee situation, who's going to be cut and who isn't?
Right. So you're asking a question that is a detailed question in terms of how decisions will be made. And let me just give you an example of, I know, again, from what the Office of the President did. If there is an organization where the job families and the structure looks different, a new organizational chart may be in place for that organization. And those individuals in that group would need to apply for those roles in that new organization. And so it's their skill sets, their expertise, and what they bring to the job would be evaluated for those roles. I also know that there's contractual obligations that we have and personnel policies. So we're working very closely with HR and legal to make sure that we follow all of the regulations. So I want to make sure that that's part of my answer. But it is basically looking at, as you would for any role, what are the skills and attributes that that individual has that would allow them to do that job. Here's a question in the front here.
Tom Hall, Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics. 2 questions following on this, on the matter of possible reduction in staff, whether you've worked out anything on the proportion that could go by attrition versus buyouts versus actually termination. And the broader question, we all know that the cost of education, and I'm not talking about research, but of education, has been going up for many years at twice or more of the cost of living. And I'm wondering whether there's any insights as to whether that can be slowed down so that we go up with the cost of living and not so fast. Thank you.
No, I don't have expertise in your second question, so maybe we could get somebody to address that who's more steeped in that than I am. In terms of how this will really work in terms of the way the units are organized, maybe I could call on Dean Hawgood to just talk a little bit about how you're thinking in the School of Medicine, because there's been some discussions of what it might look like, and specifically what it might look like to make sure that people get the services that they need.
So this is a very preliminary answer at the present time. I think the operating task force has given us a roadmap, and now we're into how could this be implemented. So the concept, I think, is that as the Chancellor described, we will aggregate services into regional centers that are local enough that they can still have contact with the important faculty and the department managers and department chairs, but we create enough critical mass and hierarchy that there's professional career development and that work can be done more efficiently. Exactly how that looks, we're just starting to model now and get a feel about it. To be frank about this, I was actually concerned when I heard these recommendations, having been a faculty member here for almost 30 years and being a chair, trying to run a department and be accountable for a department. But the more I dug into it and seen what is going on around the country, talked to other individuals with schools of our size and scope and complexity, I think this is definitely the right directional move to go. The specific details are going to now be wrestled with by the two committees that the Chancellor mentioned, a committee made up of the managers, the people who do this day in, day out, and then a faculty committee who will sort of touch base for directionality. And I think it will take us several months before we have precise detail as to how this looks. The key issues that I think need to be dealt with, timing and how this is rolled out so that we have some pilot, hopefully made up of early adapters to test what works and what doesn't work. We need to work out the funds flow, obviously, and then sort out how that's going to work. Drill down into some of the issues that the Chancellor mentioned, that is, look at workflow that we've historically done and do we need it to do it that way. Look at what we need in terms of business system support. And then the final one that is probably the foremost in most people's minds in this room is the accountability question. How are we going to hold these services centers accountable to provide the services? And how are we, to be honest, going to hold the faculty accountable to do their piece that needs to make all of this work? But the more I drill into it, the more convinced I am that this is in fact directionally the right way to go and that we can accomplish it within the time frame and with the order of magnitude cost savings that the task force put forward.
Thanks, Sam. There's a question over here. Yes.
Suzanne Hawgood, thank you, Diabetes Center. One point that I haven't seen is we have work groups in the central administration, we have work groups in schools, and in school of medicine especially. But when we're talking about regionalization of services, I would hope that some of the services that are now being done centrally could actually be moved into these regional centers and to give them enough authority to actually get the work done. And I don't see how that's going to happen if there isn't broader cross. There've got to be some committees that bridge the gap so that the regions are actually empowered to do what needs to be done, and there isn't constantly this checking and rechecking of what other people are doing.
That's great. Thank you for that suggestion. I think that's something that we can absolutely incorporate. Very good point. Thank you. Here's a question.
Carol Miller, Academic Affairs. I was struck by one of your slides where you talked about the lack of confidence and how people had communicated the lack of confidence to you. We have in UC and UCSF in particular a culture that values collaboration and consultation and communication and trust. How do you see moving forward now rebuilding the confidence, building the trust in this particular model?
That's an excellent question, and I've thought a lot about that because that's, as I mentioned, one of the most important areas of feedback is when you have an experience that's a good one, you go back for more, and when you don't, you do the opposite. And so a real example for me is when we have a new system like P2P. I've got a lot of feedback about P2P. If I use a real example, I know you're going to laugh. So. And again, remember, I wasn't here for some of the rollouts and things like that, but I have experienced P2P rollouts, not at UCSF. And the word I would use is dreadful. Okay, so I'm not talking about UCSF. My own experience was dreadful. And when everybody who I was working with wanted to give up and make it go away, the folks who rolled it out came and asked us for feedback, and they systematically fixed everything. So when those same folks came back and asked us to sign up for something else, we said, okay, you're good for your word. So I think one of the essential elements of change is when you get lots of input, and I think lots of the things that I've gotten feedback on here, a lot of input has been received, but it's that sort of in the trench, hard work, roll up your sleeves, continual feedback and continual improvement. And I do believe people here are very collaborative and have a can-do attitude, that they want their feedback to be heard, and they want, if there's something new, to be able to say, you know, over here, this isn't working for us, can we fix it, can we adjust, can we learn? And I think that lessons learned, continual improvement, not just listening before you start, but after you start a new project, I think is one of the many things we need to do to regain that confidence and trust. So let me just, there's a question there. Yeah.
You mentioned furloughs at the beginning of the presentation. Is it too early to know whether the furlough program will continue next year or will it be coming to an end?
The furlough program ends in August of 2010. That's good. You guys are very responsive. I should have you clap for something else. There's another question back there.
Hi, I'm Gail Pursley from the library, and kind of building on the confidence issue and accountability, I think I'll be really interested to see what are the metrics for success for this beyond saving the money. Like for HR, you know, we'll be able to hire people, of course, recruit, but what about the other things, you know, staying level or decrease in grievances and other issues that I depend on my HR coordinator to kind of, you know, think ahead for things that I'm not going to think of as a manager and have my back, so I do the right things and don't get the university in trouble or make things hard for my staff or whatever. So that's sort of something I hope in the planning of the implementation we'll see those kinds of success metrics, what we're going to be looking for to achieve, what's excellence look like.
Thank you very much for that feedback, and I think for me that what you're saying starts with the job families having a really clear expectation of what a level 1, 2, and 3 can do, and service level agreements. What's the turnaround time? And metrics far beyond the financial piece that we should use in terms of the service, and a little bit of what Sam was saying in terms of what does good look like, what are the expectations on both the side of somebody who's asking for the service and delivering that service. I think this project gives us the opportunity to build in those kinds of metrics. The harder thing is what you're saying, some of the softer metrics, you know, is there a can-do attitude? And one of the things I've been watching with great interest is the medical center is asking about patient satisfaction. You know, those again are softer things. What was my experience like when I came to the hospital? I think some of those tools can be used for how do you experience working with HR. So there are tools available. You don't want to over-survey people because they're survey fatigue. But I do, what you're saying really resonates for me, that we need to put in metrics above and beyond money savings. I think we'll have this as the last question, just because I know people need to get back to work. You get the last question.
Oh my goodness.
No pressure.
I was already nervous. First of all, Madam Chancellor, do you have office hours? Because I would love to come one day.
I do have office hours.
Well, I'm thinking that in addition to infrastructure changes, organizational changes that are going on, and I'm all for it, we really need to look further for in terms of rules and regulations that govern our life here, that have grown over years. Some came from above and outside, some were generated at home. And from my tenure here, I realized that many of them are counterproductive and very often are really referring to some unreal world, not the one we deal with. So when you are reforming the organization, we might find out that many jobs that right now are being done are not really necessary because they are self-serving, those roles that only propagate busy work, that doesn't create anything. And as a faculty member, it actually generates extra work for us that could be easily spared. By the way, my name is Eva Witkowska, UCSF, OBGYN, UCSF, Vasquez facility. Thank you.
I really appreciate your comments, which resonate for me, and I know because of the feedback I've received resonate for many people. I would say two things about that. It's absolutely a part of this project, is to ask ourselves, why do we do things? Why do we fill out paperwork? There is a tendency, not just at UCSF, but in the world, that if a mistake is made, a lot of new processes, forms, and procedures can ensue. And I do think we have to ask ourselves, how much do those new processes and procedures prevent the next mistake? And how do we want to manage compliance, regulatory, all of those very important issues of how we operate? But what you say very much resonates for me, so I'll ask you, do you have office hours? Great. Let me, again, thank everyone who's joined us remotely, and thank all of you for coming. I appreciate your feedback very much.